Hi there. So, I would say stop calling the dreamers dreamers, because since the American dream doesn't exist for Americans, then there is no American dream. Hey there, did you know that America gave Mexico $76 million so they could build a wall on their border, between them and Central America, because Mexico doesn't want anybody coming into their country, because if you do, you get thrown into jail for about a year if you're not killed on the spot. Hello there, it's Felina. I'm just adding this little bit on. I filmed a whole thing, and I don't have any time to set up the studio at the moment, but I just want to add a little something. Now, I've been watching these riots, these dreamers, these DACA individuals that are demanding, they're demanding that they stay in this country and that they receive benefits. And, I don't know, would you go into somebody's house and would you demand that they give you a bed permanently and pay for your food and clothing and send you to college? I don't know if I would do that, or go into another country and demand it, because there's this idea that America really belongs to Mexico, and this particular video is going to dispel that whole idea. Once you learn a little bit about the history of Mexico and the history of America's relations with Mexico and Mexico's relations to the other peoples of Central and South America, you're gonna say to yourself, it's going to be, that little saying, the pot calling the kettle black. And as you know, we have a whole contingent over here in America, the SJWs, Antifa, communist revolutionaries, liberals, progressives, so on and so forth, who say that they have every right to be here because this was once Mexico. And they think that if they can go in the streets with these other people who are members of La Raza, and that's a little something I'll get into as well, saying that, that basically La Raza has a motto. I know some people in La Raza says that La Raza is short for the cosmic community. It doesn't mean the race. But the people who are in the streets that are throwing the rocks and the eggs and yelling with the signs and the Mexican flags, basically their motto is everything for the race, everything outside the race, nothing. And so basically they want everybody who's not Mexican to move back to Europe. I mean, they want the entire continent is what the motto is. The idea of the cosmic community comes from a poem. And so if it actually means the cosmic community, that would mean everyone. Or do they mean just all the Latinos? If that's the case, then I'm a Latino, and I'm definitely included in that, because I'm one of the people who, the ethnicities that make up South America. So as far as, the SJWs, Antifa, communist revolutionaries, etc., etc., as far as they go, they think that if they go into the streets and they yell loud enough and long enough, or they basically say, yes, we agree, everybody who is not Mexican should leave and go back to Europe. Somehow they think that the people of La Raza are, taking account, or they must have taken the fingerprint of all these people, and they say, yes, you yelled loud enough and long enough, and you were able to destroy America, break up the Constitution, And so we're going to allow you to stay. You're going to be one of the Europeans that's going to be allowed to stay. And it's also the other thing is what's really interesting is that because all of these people are communist, and communism, the idea of communism is to get all the different communities. They break people up into communities. They incite racial tension, and they make one group on the outside, which is basically the white people. You make a group the enemy, and in this case it's the white people, and then you get all the races and religions fighting with each other, breaking up into groups, and that's exactly what they've done. And so you've also got the refugees, the Muslims, and they believe in Sharia, and they all want to live under Sharia. You know, if you steal something, they cut your hand off. You commit adultery, they put you in a white sack, put you in a hole, and stone you to death. You know, if you're a woman, you know, female genital mutilation, and you get beaten every single day, and that's really fun. You have to wear this, you know, black sack with slits for the eyes. You know, so, or you're flogged in public. If you're a woman, you have to wear white, because when they flog you, they kind of want to see the damage. So you kind of wonder, you've got a bunch of people that want to live under Sharia because it's according to them, it's God's law. Okay, they want to live. So who's going to be the winner of this fight? If you get us all fighting, you destroy the Constitution, and then you make a whole new country. And these people, they better hope that this new world that they're going to live in, when you destroy the Constitution and you destroy individual freedoms and rights, and the right to a fair, unbiased, you know, Lady Justice is blind, you know, you hope that the world, that whoever takes over, you know, and the people who are creating all this violence and want us to fight with each other and destroy society, these are the people that are getting us to fight with each other in the streets, and they're going to destroy society as we know it, and destroy the Constitution. And so whoever these people are going to be that are going to put together this new, who basically are doing it via violence, you know, and Bill Ayers, Barack Obama's friend, who started his campaign in his living room, said that 30 million people in this country have to die before it changes, you know, it changes over to communist. So these are the people that are going to make up this new constitution that we're all going to live under, or we're going to have a constitution at all, or the rule is just going to constantly change. It's just going to be the whim of the dictator, you know, the whim of the emperor, you know, whoever the emperor is going to be, because it's going to be one world rule, one world leader. So I think it's going to be really interesting with these social justice warriors, these communist people. You know, they think they're going to have free speech at the end, because I used to date one of these people, and he sputtered off a bunch of ludicrous nonsense like he usually does. Thank God I'm not with him anymore. And then he stopped short. He got scared because of what he said. He goes, well, we still have freedom of speech. And it's like, you idiot, if you get what you want, not for long. You know, that's your whole purpose, is destroying freedom of speech. These people actually think they've smoked enough dope that they think that they are going to live in a world where they're still going to be able to protest if something goes on that they don't like. And they still think that they're going to have freedom of speech, and there isn't going to be some really wealthy person with power, you know, with billions of dollars ruling over them. You know, so I think it's really interesting. They never thought that who's going to rule. I think the people who are not the people who of La Raza that believe in this cosmic community, which I kind of doubt that. I read up on at the Center for Immigration Studies, read up on this whole thing. It's the people usually that are on the streets that are very violent who win the war. And so I don't think it's going to be a peaceful community. And they're going to want you to go back to Europe no matter how loud and long you yelled and how much of a communist you are, because Mexico right now is actually fighting with the communists. Communists want to take over Russia. I'm not Russia, Mexico. And so they're actually still in this battle, this war that's been going on since the 90s, I think they started. So this battle is going on down there. And then, of course, the Muslims will want to live. Well, there's a lot of Muslims, I believe, personally, don't want to live under Sharia. And they come to this country and they would just love to not live under Sharia, but live under the laws. Especially the women would love to live under our Constitution. I think that would be beneficial for everyone if we all lived under the law. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Everyone has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to protest peacefully, the right to free speech, the right to an attorney, to a right for justice, equal justice under the law. But unfortunately, well, let's see who's gonna win this fight. But anyway, stick through this video. I filmed this in person, and I'm just adding this on just to the beginning. And you're gonna find when you find out the history of Mexico, you're gonna say, boy, what a bunch of hypocrites. What you got? The pot is calling the kettle black here. You're gonna learn something that you never knew before. Okay, I'll see you in a minute in person. Bye-bye. And please like and subscribe and comment. Let me know what you think. Okay? Bye-bye. Hi there. There's a myth amongst SJWs, Dems, Antifa, etc. about the war between America and Mexico. They feel America took Mexico's land away. Therefore, any Mexican that crosses the border not only belongs here, but America should pay for their trouble. We owe Mexico. I have another myth, rather reality. Rose's Cantina in El Paso. How did it get there and why? How did a Mexican woman open a Mexican cantina and employ openly Mexican Mexicans? Particularly Wicked Felina. Did she apply for citizenship, file papers, wait years? How did she prove her identity? Did Texas actually allow an illegal alien to open a cantina? Remember, this is Texas, not California. No, they didn't. And it isn't because El Paso is a song. The story of El Paso is more reality than the crazies would have you believe. And here's why. The Mexican-American War, or the War of the United States against Mexico, April 1846 to February 1848, stemming from the United States annexation of Texas in 1845, and from a dispute over whether Texas ended at the Nueces River, Mexican claim, or the Rio Grande, U.S. claim. The war in which U.S. forces were consistently victorious resulted in the United States acquisition of more than 500,000 square miles of Mexican territory extending westward from the Rio Grande to the Pacific Ocean. American blood on American soil, Polk, and the prelude to war. Mexico severed relations with the United States in March 1845, shortly after the U.S. annexation of Texas. In September, U.S. President James K. Polk sent John Sidwell on a secret mission to Mexico City to negotiate the disputed Texas border, settle U.S. claims against Mexico, and purchase New Mexico and California for up to $30 million. That would be like $15 million trillion today. That's an awful lot of money in those days, actually. Mexican President Jose Joaquin Herrera, aware in advance of Slidell's intention of dismembering the country, refused to receive him. When Polk learned of the snub, he ordered troops under General Zachary Taylor to occupy the disputed area between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande in January of 1846. On May 9, 1846, Polk began to prepare a war message to Congress, justifying hostilities on the grounds of Mexican refusal to pay U.S. claims and refusal to negotiate with Slidell. That evening, he received word that Mexican troops had crossed the Rio Grande on April 25th and attacked Taylor's troops, killing or injuring 16 of them. In his quickly revised war message delivered to Congress on May 11th, Polk claimed that Mexico had invaded our territory and shed American blood on American soil. Here's where it gets fun. I'm reading you two versions of history. Notice that reading through the different historicities of the Mexican-American War on the web, there's several different versions, and a lot of the versions, of course, paint Polk and the America as expansionist and believing in our superiority rather than our superiority of our governance is better than Catholic Mexicans. I guess we had a problem with Catholic Mexicans to the south, but interestingly, they'll say, oh, we also had a problem with the British Protestants of the north. I mean, which is kind of interesting. So apparently it wasn't about race. If we had a problem, we were trying to expand our territory, it doesn't matter what the religion was, whether it was Mexico to the south that were Catholic, or the British in Canada to the north who are white and who were Protestant. So it's interesting how they make this about race when it's actually not about race at all. But the interesting thing is that the Democrats, you see, the Congress was, we entered the war divided because Democrats, especially those in the Southwest, strongly favored the conflict. Most Whigs, which were, the Republican Party hadn't been formed yet, it was the Democrats and the Whigs at that time, viewed Polk's motives as conscienceless land grabbing. Indeed, from the outset, Whigs in both the Senate and the House challenged the veracity of Polk's assertion that the initial conflict between U.S. and Mexican forces had taken place on U.S. territory. Apparently, if it was on Mexican territory, I guess the conflict would have been all right, which doesn't make any sense. So apparently, the Democrats were in favor, and I'm going to poke to another version of historicity here. And here's where it actually gets kind of interesting. This is other historiological source here. Okay, the U.S.-Mexican War. The Mexican-American War was the first major conflict driven by the idea of manifest destiny, the belief that America had a God-given right or destiny to expand the country's borders from sea to shining sea. This belief would eventually cause a great deal of suffering for many Mexicans, Native Americans, and United States citizens. So, United States citizens suffered in this too. And Native Americans, let's not ever forget those. Following the earlier Texas War of Independence from Mexico. Let me say this again. Following the earlier Texas War of Independence from Mexico. Now, this is a rather important thing. What is about that Texas broke away from Mexico on its own? That's really interesting. Tensions between the two largest independent nations on the North American continent grew as Texas eventually became a U.S. state. Disputes over the border lines sparked military confrontation, helped by the fact that President Polk eagerly sought a war in order to seize large tracts of land from Mexico. You know, I can never say large tracts of land without thinking of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. You know, she had huge tracts of land, you know. Okay, so the causes of the conflict. The war between the United States and Mexico had two basic causes. First, the desire of the U.S. to expand across the North American continent to the Pacific Ocean, which caused conflict with all of its neighbors. So we were causing conflict with everybody. We were just awful. It basically was the Democrats' desire to expand and to get larger and larger tracts of land for slave-holding territories is actually what it is. It's interesting the Democrats are doing this all now. Okay, from the British in Canada and Oregon. So the British were in Canada and Oregon. Okay, we're having trouble, you know, we want that land too. Okay, to the Mexicans in the Southwest, and of course with the Native Americans. Ever since President Jefferson's acquisition of the Louisiana Territory in 1803, Americans migrated westward in ever-increasing numbers, often into lands not belonging to the United States. By the time President Polk, at the time it was owned by a great deal of other countries. You know, Spain once owned part of America, and it was the Spanish and the Portuguese that came over here, conquistadores, and we say it's the white man that conquered the Americas and the indigenous people. It was the Spanish and the Portuguese. And the really interesting thing is Obama has a coalition going, and he's trying to officially make Spanish and Portuguese people not white. You know, it's designated, so if you came from Spain or Portugal, you're not white. So that would mean the white man was not responsible for conquering, responsible for conquering the Americas and hurting the indigenous people, like you always say. Which is really funny. It's like, you know, you throw Italy in there and Greece, you know, because those were the southern Italy and Greece. Well, because according to Jim Crow South, it was southern Italy and Greece, not Spain or Portugal, that were considered black in Jim Crow South, which is kind of interesting. So let's see, territory 3. Okay, increasing numbers. Okay, by the time President Polk came to office in 1845, an idea called Manifest Destiny had taken root among American people, and the new occupant of the White House was a firm believer in the idea of expansion. The belief that the U.S. basically had a God-given right to occupy and civilize the whole continent gained favor as more and more Americans settled in Western lands. Okay, there's a strong, you know, I think, you know, since the dawn of time, you know, Genghis Khan, you hear of all these, and the Mughals and the Aryans that went into India, and Genghis Khan went through Asia, and even the Japanese, you know, killed 12 million people pushing across South Asia, trying to expand. You know, it seems like since the dawn of time, you're going to find wars. And of course, in Islam, you know, Muhammad said that Islam owns the whole world. And so, therefore, we know that the Prophet, all of Arabia, which there were Jews and Christians and pagans living in Arabia, well, a lot of them were killed off, and everybody in Arabia is 100% Muslim because he was a great colonizer, and tens of millions of Indians were killed because they were essentially pagans. They would not convert. So tens of millions were killed. And of course, the 180 million Africans that were taken in the Muslim African slave trade, they died in that. And of course, Islam went through across northern northern Africa, and they were going right into Europe too. And Turkey was once a Christian country, Lebanon was once a Christian country, the Middle East was Judaism and Christianity, Egypt, was Christian, and it was settled by missionaries, which were a little different than colonizers. That early Christianity was not warlike. I think when Rome took it over and kind of became the Catholic Church, things. But in the beginning, when Christianity went through all these countries, they converted it through missionaries, and so all these countries. In fact, it was a third of the known world was completely colonized within 30 years of Islam, coming onto this earth for the first time. This whole idea, in taking over all these lands where you can't even build a church or a synagogue, the great colonizers were actually the greatest of all. Was Islam, was Muhammad. So it's interesting how they're blaming America for having this. Americans had this manifest destiny, and it was their idea first. When you go through history, since the dawn of time, the Slavic people, they're called Slavs. That's where the word slave comes from, because everybody conquered them. Everybody turned them into slaves because, country after country and leader, and after you just name Attila the Hun. I mean, just if you know anything about history, the names kind of float through your head of these leaders, and the many Caesars, of course, and then the kings of England that went and killed off, and they were fighting with each other, for God's sakes, for land and the kingdom and to take treasure. And you've got that white people doing that, and you've got it all the way all over the world and through the African countries. And in fact, it was the African countries that, you see, the slave trade started. Was the kings were fighting against each other, and so they, just like the Native Americans did, the tribes fought each other, and then they took the losers as slaves, and they sold them into slavery, or they killed them mercilessly. But in Africa, it was the tribes fought against each other because white people because of the diseases and the huge, tigers and lions. I mean, it was if you entered Africa and you didn't know where you were going, there's no way you're going to go into Africa and then find a tribe and try to take the people without that tribe basically would kill you off if you did that. I mean, they're pretty strong people. Or you would get killed off by diseases or the animals, and not knowing where the heck you were going. So what really happened was, with the slave trade in Africa, I know I'm kind of digressing, is that basically the losers were sold into slavery, and they brought them to the coast, and Africans sold their own people into slavery to the Arabs, to anybody who would come and buy them, because slavery was prevalent all over the world. I mean, that was the thing with slavery. And Africa said, look, we've got tons of slaves. And so basically, slave trade, people from North and South America came, traded their guns for slaves. 5% of the slave trade came to North America. 95% went to South America. 95% South America. We got 5%, which is terrible. But out of the big picture, it's actually South America which you would kind of blame. So as far as people conquering other people and nations conquering nations, it's kind of huge. Now, as far as Mexico goes, let me kind of make it short. Mexico actually did not know where their border was. And even like Native Americans, the Sioux conquered the Cheyenne and took their land, and the Cheyenne took it from somebody else's land. They were constantly conquering, enslaving each other, skinning people alive. They're happening all over. And there were some tribes that wanted to be peaceful, but you know, the peaceful ones always get caught up in the conflict. But Mexico, you know, to claim that that Mexico even owns land, Mexico was also claiming that land that belonged to Native Americans also belonged to Mexico. I mean, you've got Native American tribes that said, hey, this is our land. Mexico also claimed their land too. So Mexico is not innocent. America is not the only one that's guilty in this taking the lands of Native Americans. And Mexico is, I understand that they are of Native people, but they also were taking the lands of other Native people. And they had no idea where their border was. And because Texas and the lands north of what is now Mexico were very sparsely populated. They were so sparsely populated. See, to claim that land, you had to have Mexicans living on it. So essentially, there wasn't really Mexicans living on that land. If there were a few that were living on the land. So the call went out from the Mexican government to people in the United States, to Americans, to come and settle in Mexican territory, in Texas. And what happened was the people of Texas, which included Mexicans and Americans, they settled, and the qualification is you had to convert to, so they were actually forcing people to convert to Catholicism, to become Mexican and to convert to Catholicism, which is kind of interesting. So it's not, so you think that's like this white people kind of, it's a white person thing that happened, that did that, not so. So they needed to fill up these lands because they needed to claim it. And by doing that, they claimed lands that they didn't own, that were owned by other Native Americans. So to claim the land, to claim Texas, which was disputed between with the United States and Mexico, because they're saying, hey, this is a bunch of land here that technically you're not using. But there was land that other Native Americans were using that nobody had a right to claim, okay? So Mexico, this is how Mexico got to claim Texas. And so this wasn't, you see how this kind of happened? So the people of Texas were fed up with the government of Mexico. Now, and these people who were fed up also included other people who were Mexican. They didn't like, so the government of Mexico back then was just as corrupt. And they decided to war with Mexico, Texas. And so Texas annexed itself from Mexico. And Texas, including the Mexicans that live there, said, we want to be a part of the United States, because they felt that the government of the United States was run more efficiently. It was more fair than the Mexican government. Now this kind of like opens up your eyes. And so when I started reading that, just a second. So when I started reading that, I thought to myself, okay, who else had a dispute with Mexico? Did other people want to break away with Mexico? And I found some interesting things. So when you actually look at history, this whole idea that we took something from Mexico, and I think it's really interesting, why are all these Mexicans wanting to leave Mexico? Like they did when Texas was annexed. Why are all these people coming to the United States and leaving Mexico? Maybe they don't like the Mexican government either. Maybe they like the way things run in America either. And I personally think that if Mexico held the lands that supposedly we say actually belong to Mexico, if they were holding those lands today and then we held other states, other parts of the Union, do you think that those Mexicans would be coming across that border into what is America, would be leaving Mexico in droves? Or if Mexico still held all those lands, magically the government would not be corrupt, and all the people would stay in that territory that Mexico claimed was theirs, which was also territory that other Native American tribes also claimed. And would Mexico have allowed the Native Americans to keep their lands? Actually, I even have an answer to that, but this is kind of interesting. Okay, so we won the war because basically the fighting tactics of Mexico and America were similar, and also our armament was similar. That we were both, because it was originally owned by Spain. You know, Spain usually owned the country, and so there were some. Except, see, Mexico lost the war because it says that the Mexican army was disorganized. It was a very disorganized system, which is kind of like, you know, you didn't say anymore. So instead of $30 million, we were going to pay them $30 million for this land. So we ended up, because we won the war, signing a treaty, and we paid Mexico $15 million. So we ended up paying for this land. We won the war. We were better fighting force, and we paid them $15 million. And back then, that's like $85 trillion. Anyway. And here's the funnest part of these are other conflicts that Mexico had with other peoples and other countries. Of course, first was the Mexican War of Independence from Spain. You know, Mexico in 1810 to 1821. It took them that amount of time to gain independence from Spain. And then there was the Central American Federation War of Independence. This is very interesting. 1822 to 1823. This only lasted about a year. The brief Mexican Empire under their emperor lost control of Central America in a short war in which the United Provinces of Central America became an independent nation. So Mexico that's complaining about, which all the Mexicans want to move to America because they want to move to America because it's probably a very well-run place. Mexico decided, got themselves an emperor, and Mexico took over Central America. So Mexico expanded its borders through Central America and decided that Mexico owned all of Central America. But the nations of Central America didn't want to be ruled by Mexico. They didn't like either how the Mexican government worked. They thought it was kind of oppressive. So they fought Mexico, and it took them only a year, and they won that. It didn't take long, apparently, because the Mexican army was kind of disorganized. Very interesting. They did that first before Texas, the part that is now America, before Texas War of Independence from Mexico. Mexico tried to take over South America. And they warred with Mexico because Mexico was, that expansionist manifest destiny thing, like Muhammad said the world belongs to Islam, should be converted at the point of a sword, and so he colonized and took over, all these countries, these non-white people. But though he was described about 7 times as the whitest man, so technically he was actually white, and his great-grandson, 34th grandson, he's white-skinned with red hair. So apparently Muhammad really was white. But anyway, there you go, white supremacy. So you can blame whites for supremacy. So apparently the Mexicans did the exact same thing. So they tried to take over South America, which was populated with lots of different native peoples. And then they did that first, and basically like Texas, which the Mexicans weren't really living in any way, and asked Americans to come and live there. Do you see where I'm going here? Okay, so that war came after the war when Central America and South America annexed itself from Mexico. So Mexico actually did it first. This is interesting. First Franco-Mexican-American War, called the Pastry War. Apparently France had some kind of intervention with Mexico and fought Mexico. And the Yucatan Secession, 1839 to 1843. The Yucatan region attempted to break away from Mexico. So the Yucatans were fighting the Mexicans because they wanted to break away from Mexico too. So these are probably, the Yucatan people were a different tribe than the Mexicans, and they wanted their independence, but they tried to break away. But Mexico won that war and wouldn't let them break away, because these Yucatan people, this was their land. They didn't like the way Mexico ran things, and they tried to break away too. Oh, this is even more interesting. The US-Mexican War, where we won these states, happened after the Yucatan Secession. You know, when the Yucatan Peninsula tried to break away from Mexico? Our war came after that. So they were already fighting. This is another war that Mexico was fighting, trying to take land that isn't theirs from the Yucatan people. And you know, after it was, okay, so the Yucatan had another rebellion in 1847 after the US-Mexican War, and the Yucatan region rebelled against the Mexican government. Again, you know, they don't want to live under this Mexican government. And there was a second Franco-Mexican War. Let me just look at that here, 1862 to 1867. See, there was a prolonged guerrilla resistance by the Mexicans. I guess France tried to take over Mexico, which who knows how that would have turned out. It might have been, we might have been wanting to move down to, crossing the border, wanting to move down to, it wouldn't be Mexico, it would be France, and there'd be some great wine and great food down there. And some, as far as winter goes, we've got winter up here and it's horribly cold. I would say it would make, it's too bad Mexico is a country that everybody wants to annex from and rebel against, because we'd be all moving down to Mexico had France taken over Mexico. Okay, here's another war, the Yaqui Indian War, 1899 to 1904. One of the last of the long series of Mexican Indian wars. Oh, the Mexicans fought the Native Americans. See, because the Mexicans are part Spanish, part, you know, they're in. So these are native people that want to remain native people. So this is the last long series of the Mexican Indian Wars. This conflict began when chiefs of the 8 principal Yaqui Indian tribes demanded Mexican withdrawal from the Sinaloa region. So the Mexicans were occupying this Indian territory, and 8 chiefs demanded that the Mexicans leave. So Mexicans went to war with these Native Americans. And the Mexican Revolutionary Civil War, 1910 to 1920, one of the last of the long series of Mexican Indian wars. This conflict, okay, there's another, oh wait, there you go, there's another conflict with Native Americans. Hold on a second. So apparently that war started again and lasted for 10 years. See, these 8 principal Yaqui Indian tribes demanded withdrawal from the Sinaloa region. So they wanted, please go. So they started up another war, again, trying to get rid of the Mexicans. And of course, let's say the U.S. tried to occupy Veracruz. And if we did, and that was America, then, you know, something I'm going to tell you at the very end. Let's say we did own Veracruz, and that was also part of America. Let's just put that in the background. Okay, and Pancho Villa in 1917 tried to take over an American town. Let's see. And Mexico fought with us in World War II, which is very nice of them. Let's see. The Chipas Uprising, 1994 to present, a rebel group calling itself the Zapatista National Libertarian Army began a revolt on New Year's Eve Day, 1994. Let's see. So basically, they're still fighting the Mexicans. Though it's you say not much conflict, but several massacres have occurred. So they've got an ongoing war with the Chiapas. So they're still fighting. So they have a problem with the Mexicans too. Okay, and the EPR Marxist guerrilla conflict, 1996 to the present. So basically the Marxists, as they always do, communists, try to take over countries by revolution. You notice how the communists believe that America belongs to Mexico, and that's why they want all the Mexicans to come over here, because this was originally Mexican territory. It was actually belonged to a lot of different tribes. A lot of different countries claimed it. They even say China came over here in the past. And then, of course, the Solutreans came over here too, and they were primarily from southern France. But anyway, that's another story. But apparently, so the communists are fighting the Mexican government. They're trying to take over Mexico. So the communists that want America to belong to Mexico, the communists down there want to take Mexico away from the Mexicans. So that's kind of hypocritical of the communists. Anyway, so here's my little point here I was going to make about, let's say America took over Veracruz. Now, here's the funny thing that happened. They say California and all these states belong to Mexico. Did you know that if any Mexican that was living in any of these territories, basically, if you were living in any of these territories and when that treaty was signed, you became an American citizen. So the story that the Mexicans are coming up here because we took their land away from them, and then as if like all the Mexicans, the idea is that all the Mexicans were pushed over the border saying, no, we took the land away from you and now we have the land. No, the people who were any Mexican that didn't like the Mexican government was living on the land that was up here. That was any land, all that land, any Mexican that was living north of the Rio Grande automatically became American. So there are Mexicans that have been here longer than most Americans. If you came here around the Civil War time, there are Mexicans that have been American citizens since before that. So essentially, if you were Mexican and you decided, I live in this part of Mexico below the Rio Grande, and that's where you wanted to live, and you wanted to be a part of Mexico, you essentially, lighting's really bad today. Essentially, you remained Mexican, and that was your decision. Anybody who decided to stay in Mexico would stay in Mexico. Anybody who wanted to be American, any Mexican that wanted to be American just either moved north at that time or was living in these territories, was completely. So the reason why Rose and Rose's Cantina, see that the light, my light's dying here. That's what the problem is. A little ring light that's dying here. So Rose's Cantina, the reason why no one was being hidden as an illegal, and she was openly, and nobody needed to apply for citizenship, is because Rose and Felina were already living in America, in Texas, and America did not, we just gave them American citizenship. So this whole idea that anything was really taken away, or we're the only people who conquer lands, it looks like the Mexicans did an awful lot of taking of lands of Native American tribes and other people. And people tried to break away from them, like, people trying to escape the Iron Curtain. So, well, anyway, one little kiss from Felina. Hope you learned something today. Goodbye. And remember, the number one reason any immigrant is here is because it isn't their home country. It is America.